Something massive is happening in Washington. The Supreme Court is preparing to rule on a case that could erase decades of political advantage for Democrats, and it's closer than anyone realizes.
Something massive is unfolding behind the closed doors of the Supreme Court, and it's the secret to understanding Elon Musk's political endgame. Democrats are about to lose their biggest structural advantage, a legal loophole that has guaranteed them power for over half a century. We're talking about a seismic shift that could hand Republicans up to 40 seats without an election. What many overlooked is how this legal earthquake connects to the population shifts, ideological battles, and cultural changes that Musk has been talking about for years. They have no idea what's coming. The political earthquake. A quiet case is moving through the Supreme Court, one that most people have never heard of. It's called Louisiana versus Clay, and on the surface it seems technical, just another boring dispute about voting maps. But not all things are what they seem. This case is a ticking time bomb set to go off in the heart of Washington, and it's poised to obliterate the Democratic Party's structural power for a generation. The central question is simple. Should we still be drawing voting districts based on race? That single decision could cause Democrats to lose between 20 and 40 seats in Congress overnight. To put it mildly, it's a shift so enormous it would permanently alter every election from now on. You see, figures like Elon Musk, who have been waging a very public war against what he calls the progressive mind virus, understand something that many in the establishment have missed. The ground is shifting beneath their feet. When Musk moved Tesla from blue California to red Texas, it wasn't just about taxes. It was a move toward a new center of gravity in American life, a place where the old rules no longer apply. This Supreme Court decision is the legal earthquake that will make that shift official. For decades, political maps have been drawn with an invisible ingredient. Now, the highest court is asking if that's still constitutional, and their answer is about to upend everything. What many overlooked is the timing. A ruling is expected between January and February of next year, giving Republican-led states just enough time to redraw their maps before the 2026 midterm elections. This isn't a coincidence. It's a perfectly coordinated strike. Many people are crazy about Musk's posts on X or his latest SpaceX launch, but the real story is how he represents a massive cultural and political realignment that is happening far away from the cameras. He is a symbol of a rebellion against an old way of doing things, and this court case is the ultimate weapon in that rebellion. It will target the very foundation of democratic power, a 60-year-old law called the Voting Rights Act, and once it falls, there is no going back. The thing nobody tells you is that this legal challenge is the culmination of years of strategic planning. For a long time, conservatives have argued that using race to draw districts, even with good intentions, is still a form of discrimination. It sorts people into boxes based on their skin color, which is the very thing the civil rights movement was supposed to end. This Supreme Court, reshaped during the Trump presidency, is now ready to agree. They aren't just looking at one map in one state. They are preparing to rule on whether the entire practice of creating so-called majority-minority districts is still legal in modern America. Democrats know that if the court says no, their advantage in Congress doesn't just shrink, it evaporates in an instant. The political battlefield is about to be redrawn, but how did we get here in the first place? The 60-year-old weapon. To understand why this moment is so explosive, we have to go back to the 1960s. America was in turmoil over civil rights. You've seen the images of peaceful marchers facing violence, demanding the simple right to vote without fear or intimidation. The nation watched, horrified, and Congress responded with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was a landmark piece of legislation, a promise that every citizen's voice would finally be heard. It tore down barriers that had kept Black Americans away from polling places for 100 years. It was, by any measure, a moral triumph. But over the decades, something strange happened. What began as a tool for equality slowly morphed into a tool for political engineering. You see, activists and legislators discovered they could use the law not just to protect voters, but to design outcomes. By the 1980s, a new strategy was born. The thing nobody tells you is how simple and effective it was. If you took minority voters, who overwhelmingly voted for Democrats, and packed them into a few super-concentrated districts, you could mathematically guarantee a certain number of blue seats in Congress. These were called majority-minority districts. On paper, it looked like progress. Black communities could elect Black representatives, and Hispanic communities could elect Hispanic representatives. However, there was a catch. While this strategy created safe seats for Democrats, it also bleached the surrounding districts, making them much more white and therefore more Republican. For a long time, the math worked in the Democrats' favor. They secured dozens of seats they never had to fight for, locked in by federal law. Every bizarre, snake-like district you see on a map, winding through cities to connect neighborhoods that share nothing in common except for their racial makeup, is a footprint of this strategy. It was a brilliant, hidden advantage that gave them an estimated 20 to 35 extra seats in the House of Representatives. This is the kind of system that figures like Elon Musk have railed against. He often criticizes systems that seem rigged or designed for a specific outcome rather than emerging from genuine competition. This political gerrymandering, disguised as social justice, is a perfect example. It prioritized group identity over individual choice and created engineered outcomes instead of letting voters decide in fair fights. It turned representation into a mathematical formula. What started as a noble cause to ensure everyone had a voice became a cynical game to ensure one party had an advantage. And for over 40 years, that game worked perfectly. But the game is about to end, thanks to a series of legal dominoes that have been falling for years. The inevitable collision. This upcoming ruling on Louisiana versus Clay isn't happening in a vacuum. The first domino fell over a decade ago, back in 2013. In a case called Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court struck down a different part of the Voting Rights Act. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that America had changed enough since 1965 that the old rules, which required some states to get federal permission before changing voting laws, were no longer needed. Critics screamed that this would lead to voter suppression, but the court held firm. The country had made racial progress, and the law needed to catch up. Now, that same logic is being applied to the practice of racial redistricting, and it's been supercharged by another landmark decision, the 2023 ruling that struck down affirmative action in college admissions. The court made it clear that discriminating based on race is unconstitutional, even if it's for a supposedly good reason. You can't say it's illegal to consider race when admitting students to college, but required when drawing voting maps. What many overlooked is that this created a massive legal contradiction, and the court is now preparing to resolve it once and for all. Political analysts have run the numbers, and the conclusion is inescapable. When the court rules, Democrats could lose anywhere from 15 to 35 seats in the House. These seats are concentrated in the South and Midwest, in states like Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. But it doesn't stop there. Combine this ruling with the massive population shifts we've seen in recent years. Millions of people have fled blue states like California and New York for red states like Texas and Florida. Elon Musk is the most famous example, but he's just one of millions. Blue states are losing population, which means they are losing congressional seats, while red states are gaining them. Then, add a final factor: the departure of millions of illegal immigrants who were counted in the 2020 census. Their presence inflated the population numbers in heavily Democratic districts. As they leave, those districts will shrink, and so will their representation. When you combine these three forces, the court ruling, the population migration, and changing census data, you get a political perfect storm. This is not just a shift. It's a historic realignment of American power that we haven't seen in a century. For Democrats, this isn't just a nightmare scenario. It's an existential crisis they cannot stop. The Musk Doctrine. Once the Supreme Court makes its decision, the political landscape of America will never look the same. Republican-led states will move with surgical precision to redraw their maps based on geography and population, not race. For the first time in decades, a massive number of congressional districts will become truly competitive. Representatives will no longer be able to take their seats for granted. They'll have to show up, listen, and actually earn the trust of the people. In short, they'll have to do their jobs. This is the kind of America that figures like Elon Musk and others seem to be quietly betting on. A system where merit replaces identity and ideas replace slogans. It's a radical shift away from the engineered politics of division that have dominated for half a century. The progressive framework was built around group identity, the belief that only a person from a specific background could truly represent that background. That logic produced affirmative action, racial quotas, and district lines drawn not by geography, but by ancestry. These measures were introduced as temporary corrections, but temporary solutions tend to dig in. They become industries of their own, careers, budgets, bureaucracies, and soon, what began as fairness turns into its mirror opposite. Now, the Supreme Court is forcing the nation to stare directly into that paradox. When does a policy meant to heal inequality start to create it? When does protection turn into preference? The decision could become the philosophical shockwave of a generation. It asks America to choose between two visions, one that divides by identity and one that unites through shared rules. Democrats will fight this ruling with everything they have. Expect fiery speeches, legal challenges, and massive protests framed as a defense of civil rights. But the counter-argument will be equally thunderous. True equality means no more special treatment. The idea that colorblindness is racism has never sat well with most Americans. And this ruling will empower that sentiment. It will say, in essence, that the country has matured, that it's time to stop sorting people into racial boxes and start judging them by results. Yet beneath the surface, some see even stranger undercurrents moving. Whispers are already spreading that this isn't just politics. It's the first step in a quiet realignment of power, one that could stretch far beyond red and blue. Some theorists believe that powerful figures in Silicon Valley, those who champion rational governance and data-driven meritocracy, are watching the collapse of identity politics as their opportunity. If race-based systems fall, the next political currency becomes raw performance. Elections might someday be less about parties and more about platforms, literally, technological platforms that shape what people see and believe. Imagine a future where AI-assisted governance begins to emerge, where data replaces demographics as the measure of political value, where loyalty isn't determined by ethnicity, but by digital footprint, voting history, and consumer behavior. In this vision, the redrawing of districts could be just the visible tip of a much deeper transformation, a shift from the human age of identity to the algorithmic age of merit. Some even whisper that this decision might open the door for AI-guided redistricting itself, replacing partisan human mapmakers with supposedly impartial machines. And yet, others take the theory further still. They argue that this entire Supreme Court shift is part of a larger ideological experiment, a kind of social reset designed not by politicians but by networks of global power, financial, technological, and even psychological. These groups, they claim, are testing how far a society can swing from one extreme to the other without collapsing. The end of race-based policy might be the first domino in a long chain, leading to the erosion of all collective identities, racial, gendered, even national. What happens when individuals are stripped of their inherited labels? Do they become freer or more controllable? The three justices appointed during the Trump presidency will be remembered as the architects of this transformation. Their influence goes beyond one case or one decade. They shifted the axis of American law itself. With every decision, they're not just interpreting the Constitution, they're rewriting the social code of the nation. This ruling will echo for generations because it redefines what fairness means in the modern world. For Democrats, the implications are catastrophic. Their political machinery, built for decades on targeted demographics and identity coalitions, will suddenly find itself obsolete. Once the maps are redrawn and racial boundaries vanish, they can't rely on safe seats. To win, they'll need persuasion, innovation, and authenticity, qualities long buried beneath party discipline and talking points. Their fear isn't just losing power now, it's the possibility of never regaining it under the new rules. And that's where the more speculative theories begin to spiral. Some believe this is part of a slow-motion revolution, not led by voters, but by systems, economic, legal, and technological, designed to reset the game. Others whisper that this shift was foreseen, even engineered, years ago. That the Trump appointments, the AI revolution, the cultural backlash against political correctness, all of it was part of an invisible convergence, a historical correction moving through institutions like a gravitational wave. The rules of power in America are about to be rewritten forever. Is this the end of civil rights, or the true beginning of equality? Let us know below. Like and subscribe.